I stood in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, watching the city sprawl beneath me like a grid of ambition and indifference. My dress was simple. Navy blue, cotton blend, nothing that whispered wealth or power. I'd chosen it that morning because it was clean, because it fit, because I didn't think anyone would notice me anyway. I was there to observe, to learn, to blend into the background of a presentation I'd helped build from spreadsheets and late-night research. The executives around me wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my rent, their watches catching the light like tiny declarations of success. I clutched my portfolio folder against my chest and told myself I belonged here, even if everything about the room suggested otherwise. But doubt has a way of seeping in through the smallest cracks. The intern arrived 10 minutes before the presentation was set to begin, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. She was young, maybe 23, fresh from some Ivy League school with a last name that opened doors before she even knocked. Her suit was charcoal gray and perfectly pressed. Her hair swept into a bun so sleek it looked engineered. When her eyes landed on me, something flickered across her face, a mix of confusion and barely concealed amusement. She leaned toward another junior associate and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw her glance dart back to my dress, then away, as if looking too long might be contagious. Heat crept up my neck, that familiar burn of being sized up and found wanting. I wanted to disappear into the leather chair, to become invisible. She approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of expression people wear when they're about to deliver a kindness that's really cruelty in disguise. "You must be new here," she said, her voice light and sharp at the same time. "I don't think we've met. Are you with the catering staff?" The words hung in the air like smoke, and suddenly every person in that room felt miles away. I opened my mouth to correct her, to explain that I was the senior analyst who'd compiled the entire investment deck they were about to present, but my voice caught somewhere between anger and humiliation. The other executives pretended not to hear, their eyes suddenly fascinated by their phones, by the view, by anything except the moment unfolding in front of them. The intern's smile widened just slightly, a private victory. And I realized that to her, I was already dismissed. I managed to find my voice, quiet but steady. "I'm on the analytics team," I said, meeting her gaze even as my hands trembled against the folder. She blinked, her confidence faltering for just a second before she recovered with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, pretty and hollow. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I just thought, well, you know, the dress and everything." She trailed off, leaving the insult to complete itself in the silence. Around us, the room filled with more people, vice presidents and directors greeting each other with firm handshakes and knowing nods, the kind of casual power I'd only ever observed from the margins. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller with each passing second, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake thinking I could exist in this world. The fluorescent lights felt too bright suddenly, exposing every thread of my inadequate dress. I wanted to run, but I'd worked too hard to run now. The presentation materials in my hands represented 6 months of research, countless nights parsing through financial models and market analyses that would shape millions of dollars in decisions. I knew every number, every projection, every risk factor better than anyone else in this room, including the senior partners who would take credit for my work. My dress didn't change that. The intern's condescension didn't erase the expertise I'd built through years of proving myself in rooms that never expected me to speak, let alone lead. I straightened my shoulders and moved toward my assigned seat near the head of the table, feeling her eyes follow me with renewed curiosity or perhaps confusion. The other analysts nodded at me with the kind of respect earned through late nights and delivered results. I belonged here, even if I had to remind myself with every breath. The room settled into an anticipatory hush as our CEO began his opening remarks. His voice smooth and practiced, designed to inspire confidence in men with deep pockets. I'd heard this speech before. The vision, the opportunity, the guaranteed returns that were never actually guaranteed. My role was simple. Sit quietly, provide data if called upon, let the senior executives perform their carefully choreographed dance of persuasion. The intern had positioned herself near the door, still watching me with that mixture of amusement and disbelief, as if waiting for me to reveal myself as the imposter she believed I was. I focused on my breathing, on the familiar weight of my research, on anything except the burning sensation of being judged and found lacking based on fabric and cut. Outside the windows, clouds drifted past our tower, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in climate-controlled rooms. And I waited for this moment to pass. But then the door opened and everything changed. The room's energy shifted instantly, everyone sitting straighter, smiles becoming more strategic, as Arcio paused mid-sentence. "Ah, perfect timing," he said, his voice taking on a new layer of deference I'd never heard before. A man entered, mid-50s, silver hair, a presence that filled the space without effort, the kind of quiet power that comes from having more money than most people can conceptualize. This was Marcus Chen, the venture capital legend whose single investment could transform a promising company into an industry titan, or whose rejection could close doors for years. Every person in that room knew his reputation. Brilliant, exacting, and notoriously selective about where he placed his trust and capital. The CEO extended his hand, already launching into a greeting, but Marcus's eyes were scanning the room, searching for something. Or someone. His gaze landed on me, and I felt the world tilt sideways. Recognition flashed across his face. Not the polite acknowledgement of a stranger, but something deeper, something that carried years and memories I'd carefully boxed away. "Elena," he said, my name cutting through the CEO's carefully prepared welcome. The room went completely silent, every eye turning toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to calculation. The intern's mouth opened slightly, her earlier smugness evaporating like morning fog. Marcus moved past the CEO, past the senior partner's position to greet him, walking directly to where I sat frozen in my simple navy dress. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," he said, and in his voice I heard echoes of a different time, a different version of myself I'd almost forgotten. The presentation, the deal, the entire reason for this meeting. All of it hung suspended in that impossible moment when my past collided with my carefully constructed present. The silence in the room felt like pressure against my skin, every person holding their breath, trying to understand why the most important investor in venture capital was speaking to me like we shared history. My mind raced backward through years I'd tried to leave behind. The small consulting firm where I'd started, the project that had nearly destroyed my confidence, the mentor who'd seen something in me when I couldn't see it myself. Marcus had been a client then, a startup founder gambling everything on an idea that seemed impossible, and I'd been the analyst who'd believed in him when every traditional metric said to walk away. I'd worked 18-hour days modeling scenarios, finding pathways through risk that others couldn't see, building the case that eventually secured his first major funding round. That company had grown into something extraordinary, making Marcus one of the most respected investors in the country. But I'd moved on, changed firms, rebuilt myself in spaces where no one knew that version of me. "It's been a long time," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt, aware of dozens of ears cataloging every word for later analysis and gossip. Marcus smiled, the kind of genuine expression that was rare in rooms like this, where every gesture served strategy. 10 years, he said, since you convinced me to pivot our entire business model. Best advice I ever received." The CEO's face had transformed from confident to confused to calculating, trying to reassess the power dynamics in a room he'd thought he controlled. The senior partners exchanged glances, their expressions shifting as they recalculated my value based on this new information. Not on my work, which they'd barely acknowledged, but on my connection to money and influence. I felt the familiar twist of bitterness knowing that nothing I'd accomplished in this company mattered, until a powerful man validated my existence. The intern had gone pale, her earlier mockery hanging in the air between us like something toxic. Marcus pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down, an unprecedented breach of corporate protocol that made the CEO visibly uncertain about how to proceed. "I hope you're working on this deal," Marcus said to me, ignoring everyone else. "I told your CEO when he reached out that I'd only consider this investment if the due diligence was exceptional. Looking at your team, I wasn't optimistic." His words landed like stones in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading through the executive ranks. I felt their resentment building, How dare this outsider, this woman in a cheap dress, command the attention they'd spent weeks trying to secure? But I also felt something else rising in me, something I'd suppressed for too long in the name of fitting in, of not making waves, of being grateful for opportunities men granted as favors. I'd done the work. I'd built the analysis that made this presentation possible. And I was done apologizing for taking up space. I led the analytics, I said, meeting Marcus's eyes with a confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. Every projection, every market analysis, every risk assessment, that's my work. I could feel the CEO's panic, wondering if this admission would somehow undermine his authority or if supporting it might serve his interests better. Marcus nodded slowly, that same assessing look he'd given me a decade ago when I'd first walked into his office with recommendations that contradicted everything his board wanted to hear. Then I'd like to review it with you, he said. Privately if possible. I trust your judgment more than any presentation deck. The room erupted in barely contained chaos, the CEO trying to maintain control, senior partners offering to join the meeting, everyone suddenly desperate to be included in whatever conversation might determine their company's future. But Marcus raised his hand, a simple gesture that commanded immediate silence. Just Elena, he said. If she vouches for this deal, I'm interested. Otherwise, I'm not. The power shift was instantaneous and complete. Suddenly I wasn't the invisible analyst in the wrong dress. I was the gatekeeper to the funding that could transform this company's trajectory. The CEO looked at me with new eyes, calculating how to leverage this unexpected asset, already mentally rewriting whatever narrative he'd tell the board about discovering my talent. The senior partners who'd ignored my contributions for months now smiled at me with the kind of warmth reserved for people who control resources they need. And the intern, she'd moved into the corner, her face flushed with something between embarrassment and fear, probably realizing that the woman she'd mocked as catering staff could now influence her entire career with a single conversation. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted by the transparency of it all, by how quickly respect could be manufactured when it served self-interest. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, a recognition of opportunity, of doors opening that I'd thought were permanently closed. I'd spent years making myself smaller, accepting less credit than I deserved, convincing myself that quiet competence would eventually be rewarded. And here was Marcus, someone who'd seen my value long before I fully believed in it myself, offering to amplify my voice in a room that had tried to silence it. The weight of that gift pressed against my chest, heavy with responsibility and possibility. We can use the small conference room, I said, standing and gathering my materials, feeling every eye track my movement like I was suddenly visible for the first time. Marcus stood with me, and as we moved toward the door, the CEO scrambled to express his full support, his enthusiasm, his complete confidence in my abilities, words he'd never offered in the months I'd worked under his leadership. I nodded politely, professionally, while inside I catalogued every false note for future reference. As we left the main conference room, I caught the intern's eye one last time. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the expensive carpeting. Her earlier cruelty reflected back at her with compound interest. Part of me wanted to say something cutting, to return the humiliation she'd tried to hand me. But I realized that her opinion, her judgment, her narrow understanding of worth based on appearance, none of it had ever really been about me. It was about her own insecurity, her desperate need to establish hierarchy in a world where she probably felt just as uncertain as I did, just better at hiding it behind designer suits and inherited confidence. So I simply walked past her, my simple navy dress suddenly irrelevant to my value, carrying my expertise and my history and my hard-won knowledge into a private conversation that would determine more than just one investment deal. The door closed behind us, muffling the anxious murmurs of people recalculating their assumptions. In the smaller conference room, away from performing executives and judgmental interns, Marcus and I sat across from each other like we'd done a decade ago, when the stakes felt impossibly high and the outcomes uncertain. "You've been hiding," he said, not unkindly. "I've watched your career from a distance. You're brilliant, Elena, but you keep choosing companies that undervalue you." His words hit harder than the intern's mockery because they carried truth I'd been avoiding. I'd convinced myself that staying small was strategic, that building credibility slowly was the smart path, that eventually my work would speak loudly enough that I wouldn't have to. But work doesn't speak. People interpret it, claim it, reshape it to serve their narratives. And I'd let them over and over, because demanding recognition felt dangerous, felt like risking the precarious belonging I'd fought to establish. Marcus opened my presentation deck, his eyes scanning projections I'd labored over, and I prepared to defend my analysis, to prove my worth one more time to someone whose validation shouldn't matter this much but somehow still did. The review took 2 hours, Marcus asking questions that cut through surface analysis to the assumptions underneath, the same rigorous examination that had terrified me years ago but now felt like coming home. He challenged my market projections, pushed back on my risk assessments, demanded I defend conclusions that the senior partners had accepted without question because they hadn't understood them deeply enough to critique. And with each question I felt myself expanding back into the full scope of my capabilities, remembering what it felt like to work with someone who respected my intelligence enough to truly test it. We debated methodology, argued about data interpretation, built and rebuilt financial models on the whiteboard until the glass wall was covered in formulas and scenarios. By the end, I'd modified 3 of my original projections based on his insights, and he'd conceded 2 points where my analysis proved more comprehensive than his initial assumptions. This was the collaboration I'd been missing. Not performance, not politics, just 2 minds engaged with complex problems, seeking truth rather than advantage. "I'll invest," Marcus said finally, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd found what they were looking for. "But I have conditions." My stomach tightened, wondering what price would come with this opportunity, what compromise I'd be asked to make. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked at me with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "I want you leading the integration team. Not assisting, not supporting, leading. And I want your compensation to reflect that responsibility. If your CEO has a problem with either condition, the deal is off." The words hung in the air like a challenge, not to me but to the power structures I'd been navigating carefully for years. This wasn't just about one investment or one promotion. It was about whether I was willing to stop making myself convenient for people who benefited from my silence. The fear rose immediately, all the old voices warning me not to ask for too much, not to seem difficult, not to risk the stability I'd built. But underneath the fear ran something stronger, a deep, bone-tired exhaustion with diminishing myself. "Okay," I said, the single word feeling like jumping off a cliff, trusting that either I'd fly or the fall would teach me something essential. Marcus smiled, the kind of expression that suggested he'd been waiting to see if I'd finally bet on myself. "Good. Let's go tell them." We walked back to the main conference room where the entire executive team had remained, their presentation abandoned, their attention fixed on the closed door we'd disappeared behind. When we entered, the CEO stood immediately, his face arranged in an expression of hopeful anxiety. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries or negotiation theater. "I'm investing," he said, "contingent on Elena being named Senior Director of Strategic Integration, reporting directly to the board, with full authority over deal execution and compensation commensurate with that responsibility." The room erupted in carefully controlled chaos, some executives nodding enthusiastically, others exchanging glances that telegraphed resentment and recalculation. The CEO's smile was genuine, but his eyes revealed the quick math he was doing, weighing the cost of promoting me against the value of securing Marcus's capital and reputation. "Of course," the CEO said, extending his hand to me with sudden warmth, as if this had been his plan all along. "Elena's contributions have been invaluable. We're thrilled to expand her role." The words tasted like ash. Not because I didn't want the promotion, but because I knew it was being granted under duress, not recognition. The senior partners who'd taken credit for my work now congratulated me with tight smiles, already strategizing how to manage this shift in hierarchy. And the intern, she'd made herself as small as possible in the corner, her face pale, her earlier arrogance completely extinguished. I should have felt satisfaction watching her discomfort, but instead I felt a complicated mixture of empathy and frustration. She'd been taught, as I had been, that power came from diminishing others, from maintaining hierarchies based on appearance and pedigree rather than substance. The system that had led her to mock my dress was the same system that would eventually chew her up and spit her out when she stopped being useful. We were both trapped in it, just at different points in the maze. Marcus finalized details with the CEO while I stood there feeling like I was watching my life from outside my body, unable to fully process the seismic shift that had occurred in the span of hours. When the meeting finally ended, people approached me differently, not with dismissal or condescension, but with strategic friendliness, already repositioning themselves in relation to my new power. The intern approached last, her steps hesitant, her confidence completely shattered. "I wanted to apologize," she started, her voice small. "What I said earlier about your dress, about the catering, that was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. I'm really sorry." Part of me wanted to accept her apology gracefully, to model the generosity I wished I'd received when I was young and making mistakes. But another part remembered the particular cruelty in her smile, the casual way she tried to erase my presence based on nothing but appearance and assumption. "Thank you for the apology," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But I want you to understand something. What you did wasn't just rude to me. It was revealing about how you see value and worth in other people. That's something to examine in yourself, not just apologize away." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes, and I felt the weight of influence I'd never wanted, the power to shape her trajectory with my response, to either crush her spirit or offer something that might help her grow past this moment. "I've made similar mistakes," I continued, softening slightly. "Different context, same arrogance of thinking I could judge someone's worth by surface details. The question is whether you learn from this or just get better at hiding your prejudices." I left her with that thought, not because I was trying to be kind or cruel, but because it was true. We all had to choose whether our failures would teach us or just make us more careful about performing acceptance. The rest of the afternoon blurred past in meetings and emails, congratulations and barely disguised resentment, the machinery of corporate politics adjusting to accommodate my unexpected elevation. By the time I left the building, the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of amber and shadow, transforming the grid of ambition below into something almost beautiful. I walked to my car in the parking garage, my simple navy dress still simple, still navy, still exactly what it had been that morning when it seemed to matter so much. But somehow it felt different now. Not because the fabric had changed, but because I'd stopped letting other people's perceptions define its meaning. The dress was just a dress. My worth wasn't stitched into its seams or proven by its price tag. What mattered was the knowledge in my head, the work I could produce, the judgment I'd honed through years of analysis and error and late nights translating complexity into clarity. Marcus's intervention had created opportunity, yes, but it had also reminded me of something I'd forgotten in years of making myself palatable. I didn't need permission to take up space. I didn't need validation from people who'd overlooked me until it served their interests to see me. The real question was whether I could hold on to that truth when the spotlight moved, when I was alone with my decisions, when no investor was there to advocate for my value. Driving home through evening traffic, I thought about the intern's tearful apology, the CEO's calculated congratulations, the senior partner's strategic friendliness. All the ways people rearranged themselves around power rather than principle. I'd been guilty of it too, accommodating mistreatment because fighting it felt too costly, accepting less because asking for more seemed too risky. But risk was relative. The real danger wasn't in demanding fair treatment. It was in slowly eroding your sense of worth until you couldn't remember what you deserved in the first place. Tomorrow I'd walk into that office as senior director, with authority I'd earned but only received through circumstance and connection. Some people would resent it. Others would try to use it. A few might actually respect it. And I'd have to navigate all of that while staying true to the knowledge that brought me here. The expertise that existed independent of titles or recognition. The thought was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. But tonight, alone in my car with the city lights blurring past, I let myself feel something I'd suppressed for too long, pride. Not in the promotion, though that mattered. Not in proving the intern wrong, though that had its own satisfaction. But pride in the years of work that built the foundation for this moment, The late nights and rejected ideas and incremental improvements that no one celebrated, but that made me genuinely good at what I did. My dress hadn't changed. The executives' opinions hadn't actually changed either, just their calculations about whether acknowledging my worth served their interests. But I had changed. I'd remembered that my value wasn't a story other people got to write about me. It was something I built every day through showing up, doing the work, and refusing to shrink myself to fit into spaces designed to keep me small. And maybe that's what rising above really meant. Not transcending the room through others' validation, but refusing to let the room define the boundaries of who you could become. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't changing minds, but protecting your own truth until the world catches up.